Hello again, and welcome back to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at day 55 for Monday, February 24th, 2020, focusing on Deuteronomy chapters 9 through 11. So we will see a little bit more about Moses recounting the story, talking about the unhelpful ways of disobedience and the helpful ways of obedience, of what that can look like, talking about the whole story of them wandering through the wilderness. So let's dive into what Moses has to say for us now. Know that today that the Lord your God is the one who crosses over before you as a devouring fire. He will defeat them and subdue them before you, so that you may dispossess and destroy them quickly, as the Lord has promised you. Moses is talking about entering into the promised land. Again, he is on Mount Nebo, overlooking the Jordan into the promised land, but he will not lead them there. Joshua will lead them into the promised land, but he is telling them that God will give them in this land into their hands. He also mentions and connects it with their story and saying it's not because of their righteousness, but the wickedness of the nations who are in Canaan. As we have seen previously, especially in Genesis with the cursing of Canaan, the cursing of Ham, that God has some beef with the people of Canaan, and thus they are wicked in his sight, and God will give the land to the Israelites. But he also acknowledges the Israelites are not perfect. They are, in verse 6, a stubborn people. And God even says, you have been rebellious against the Lord from the day you came out of the land of Egypt. Yet God is going to bless you in spite of yourselves and your human desires, is what Moses is saying. But God has these statutes that will keep you on the right path. And Moses is advocating for the Israelites to let God do this. And as God says, I will be your life coach. God will be the one to help you know the right path for your life. God will be the people's life coach. Moses reminds them of some important rebellions, the golden calf story, which was in Exodus 32, for us, day 25 of the study, and two from Numbers chapter 11, from day 43. Those events were called Taberah. That's the general complaints in the wilderness where the Lord's fire came and consumed the people. And then Kibroth Hatatav, where, I can't say that very well. Complaints about meat and people wanting, to have meat, and God giving them the fill of quail there in the wilderness. From both of those from Numbers 11. Then we have the story of Massa, or as I like to call it, Meribah, the time where they complained about not having any water, and there was water from the rock. That was in Exodus 17 from day 21. We talked about that. And then Kadesh Barnabah, that's the people hesitate to enter into the promised land because of the report of the spies in Numbers 14. We talked about that on day 44. So Moses, instead of recounting all the details, Moses is just giving a summary of what has happened and how the people have been stubborn there in the wilderness. Moses also mentions that because of their stubbornness, he destroys the original 10 commandments that God gave them, and so then recounts talking down God from destroying the people there in chapter 9. Moses in chapter 10 retells receiving the second set of the stones that have the 10 commandments on them, and then placing those stones in the Ark of the Covenant which he had made. Moses also recounts Aaron's death and the appointment of Eleazar as high priest, and setting apart the Levites, and then God relenting from destroying these stubborn people. Moses, after all of these things, remembers them very well and then repeats the essence of the law back to them in Deuteronomy 10:12 through 13. So now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? Only to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord your God and his decrees that I am commanding you for your own well-being. When we get into the latter prophet of Micah, in here, Micah 6:8, I believe, is where it talks about what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with the Lord. We see that in Deuteronomy 10. That emphasis is brought from Deuteronomy, and it's what God calls these people to follow in the essence of the law. In Deuteronomy 10:20, we see God then restates God's important ways, the practice of circumcision, to not be partial, to not take bribes, to execute justice for the orphan and the widow, to love the strangers, providing them with food and clothing. For you were once strangers in the land of Egypt, as it says in Deuteronomy 10:19. All of this, you shall fear the Lord your God, him alone shall you worship. So chapter 11 then gets into discussion about these blessings and these curses, these rewards for obedience, and also where the buck is at, who's responsible. In the opening of chapter 11, it says, it is you who must acknowledge God's greatness. And then Moses gives another list of God's events and his accolades that he has done, which I will not recount at this time. Look it up in Deuteronomy 11. The promised land is a blessed land because it is a land that the Lord your God looks after, as it says in Deuteronomy 11:12. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning of the year unto the end of the year. And then the end of chapter 11 sets up some blessings for the obedient and the curses for the disobedient, saying in Deuteronomy 11:13, if you only heed his commandments, rain for your land, it will get rain for your land in its due season, and you will gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, and he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you will eat your fill. And that was 14 and 15, but looking at verse 24 and 25, it says, every place on which you set your foot shall be yours, and no one will be able to stand against you. These are all of these blessings that God is giving to the Israelites when they heed his every commandment. At the end, we also have forgetting God will mean that these things will not happen. And then previously, just a little bit before all of these blessings and curses, but I think it's a fitting note to end on. Just a reminder, the responsibility is on you. It is responsibility also for instructing your children of these important statutes. And again, Moses then restates to promote these commandments when you're at home with your kids, when you're away, when you lie down, when you rise. So that theme repeated again, that it is up to you to teach your children the ways of that God is commanding them. So as God is our life coach, may we teach others to follow God in God's ways.